Do you yearn for travel that involves outdoor adventure and learning? I do. I also have a passion for all things farming and agriculture. I've traveled to exotic jungles to learn about growing chocolate. I even once owned my own organic vegetable and sunflower farm. And now I'm planning my journey back to agriculture. Agritourism, defined as travel that involves some type of agricultural experience. Agritourism is all about entertaining. But the marketing strategist in me knows that at its core, agritourism is really about educating, and education affects change. My future farm needs to deliver a profound experience to all of its visitors. It needs to educate people about food, health, and climate. Join me to learn from experienced agritourism farmers and entrepreneurs and help me build my future farm strategy. And who knows, maybe one day soon you'll find yourself in a tropical jungle cutting open cacao pods with a machete, or savoring an outdoor plant-to-plate community dinner with 100 guests at a farm in Illinois. So let's tap into the agritourist in you. This is your Agritourist podcast host, Jen Ross. I recently had the pleasure of speaking to Lisa Chase from the University of Vermont. Lisa's primary role is the Natural Resources Specialist at University of Vermont Extension, where she focuses on the intersection between environmental management, food systems, and community development. She is also the director of the Vermont Tourism Research Center, emphasizing tourism and recreation in her programming. Lisa has a significant focus on agritourism in Vermont. Beyond Vermont, Lisa also collaborates as part of the National Extension Tourism Network, working with partners throughout the United States. And most recently, she is heading up the new Global Agritourism Network, which we will learn more about in today's podcast. I was so excited to meet with Lisa and really dig deeper into what agritourism really is. Our conversation inspired some new thinking about how we are defining agritourism and the impact of these definitions on farms and farm customers. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Lisa Chase as much as I did. She is truly an inspiring leader who has been very effective at bringing people together towards a common goal. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm excited to speak to you today. I was looking at everything you sent me. I was linking all over the place, and there's just so much information. It was so valuable. So thank you for sending me all of that. So I'm so excited about this process because I love connecting with people like yourself and farmers. And I did my first trip. I didn't call it agritourism at the time, but many years ago, I went to Belize to learn about chocolate. And it was just because I love chocolate. I never really knew, people think chocolate bar made in a factory has no connection to a plant or a tree. That trip was a life changer for me. I went alone too. It was the first time I actually traveled myself. It was with a group, but I was the only one from New York. Everyone was from California. So we met there, and it was a trip of a lifetime. And that's where agriculture, like the connection for me, came into being. And then at the same time, I was volunteering at a farm here for almost 10 years. They donated all their produce to food pantries here. And so everything started connecting about, agriculture and our environment and the earth and that connection to food and where our food comes from. So that's how it all started for me. But tell me about you. Where are you from, and how did you get here to UVM?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So I grew up actually in the suburbs of Boston, not on a farm, but we were very into gardening, and we always went apple picking, and there was a farm where we would get eggs, and there was a farm stand we would go to. So I sort of grew up visiting farms, but not having a farm of my own. And then when I started to do work, especially in developing countries, and a lot of people were working in agriculture, and I always felt like, oh, well, I can't work in agriculture because I didn't grow up on a farm. And I still feel like I'm not the best person to be advising on production. And I make a point not to do that. And when I'm consulting with farms, through University of Vermont Extension, I'm always referring them to our dairy specialist or our agronomist or somebody who has the expertise and experience and training in food, fiber, or fuel production. However, what I learned along the way is that in some ways, it's a benefit to not be a farmer yourself when you're working with farmers on that interface between farmers and visitors. Because part of what I do when I'm supporting farms that are interested in opening up to visitors for, whether it's an overnight farm stay or pick your own or educational tours or a farm stand or whatever, is I can come in with the eyes of the consumer, with the eyes of the visitor, and see things that could be difficult or confusing or dangerous for visitors that a farmer may not realize because they're used to it.
Yep. How did you get into this space? I know you went to Cornell, and what did you study there? And then how did you get into the space? Because it's a unique space.
You're right. It's a very unique space. And I will tell you that the first time I heard the word agritourism it's now about little over 22 years ago when I was applying to the job at University of Vermont Extension, the job that I still currently have. So I was finishing up my graduate work, like you mentioned, at Cornell University, and for part of my graduate work at Cornell, I had made a point to work with Cornell Cooperative Extension because I really liked applied research with very practical and measurable impacts on the ground, in the field. I enjoy applied research. I didn't want to just do research that gets published and sits on a shelf and is read only by, other people with PhDs. I really wanted to do research that had meaningful impact. So even for my graduate work, I made a point to work with Cornell Cooperative Extension and work on applied research topics. So then when I was looking for different jobs after I was done with graduate school, and I should say, my husband grew up in Brattleboro, Vermont, and his parents and sister and tons of cousins and uncles and family, they're all still in Brattleboro. So there was a bit of a draw.
That's okay. That's a good connection to have.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's actually been a very nice connection. Yeah, there was a draw pulling us towards Vermont. And so when I saw the University of Vermont Extension posting, and it was for a natural resource specialist, but the description was so broad that it covered so many different things. And one of the pieces that were mentioned was agritourism. And I thought, I wonder what that is. And, this was a little before you could just Google any term. And this was before
yeah, we remember those days.
Yeah. Yeah. So I started asking around, what is agritourism? And I have to say that probably I would ask 10 people and I'd get 12 different answers. And I feel like it's still a little bit that way today. First of all, I'd say most of the people would say, what? I don't know, never heard of it. But, then it was very helpful that on my search committee were farmers in Vermont like Beth Kennett from Liberty Hill Farm.
Yes.
Who I know you've spoken to already.
Yes. Yep.
She was actually on the UVM Extension search committee that hired me. And so I got to hear a lot about what agritourism was from one of the pioneers in the US doing agritourism. And I also got to hear what do farmers need and how can Extension work effectively with farmers and with their communities around agritourism. So it was really this job at UVM Extension that wasn't specifically focused on agritourism, but that was a part of it. And then as agritourism has grown in importance in Vermont, around the US, and around the globe, I've sort of, ridden that train all the way to becoming the founding chair of the Global Agritourism Network.
Yes, and we want to talk about that. So, how do you define agritourism?
That is such an excellent question. And I'll preface my answer by saying that here in the US and in Vermont, we do not have one consistent, widely recognized definition. And that causes quite a few problems for communication, measurement, policy, marketing. People use it in a lot of different ways. To address this issue of what is agritourism anyway, this was probably around 6, 7 years ago. I worked with a multi-state team of colleagues around the US to develop a conceptual framework for understanding agritourism. And essentially, the core of agritourism, where there's agreement, is it's taking place on a working farm. It's deeply connected to agriculture, and it's educational for visitors. Those are the pieces that people agree on. So you pick apples or berries. Those are great examples. Farm to table meals where people are coming to a farm and the food is from that farm or even other farms nearby. And there's education about what went into the production of the amazing food that you're eating. Harvest festivals, overnight farm stays where you're staying on a farm in an immersive way, not just in a, hi, I'm checking into my Airbnb and not having anything to do with the farm, but where you're helping with the farm chores, learning about agriculture. That's the core of agritourism. That's where the agreement is. Then there's all these places with disagreement in terms of, does it constitute agritourism? For example, if it's taking place on a farm, but is kind of disconnected from the actual farm experience, some people are still going to call it agritourism. Other people would say, if you're just using the farm as like a backdrop or a view shed, weddings on a farm, for example, that aren't making use of the local farm products, that's where things become a little more controversial. Or if it's taking place off a farm, this is another one of those tricky areas where in some states in the US, and especially within tourism marketing, they'll call farmers markets that are not on a farm part of agritourism, or agricultural festivals, county fairs that, are not taking place on a farm. People will refer to that as agritourism, while a lot of the, for example, the liability protection legislation for agritourism is specifically about being on a working farm. So very sorry to not, I wish I could just give you this 10-word definition. And there are some of those, succinct definitions out there that I could follow up afterwards and, send you a little quoted. Here's one of the often cited definition that I think sums it up well. But I would say that for practical purposes, having this, sort of conceptual framework of here's where we agree, here's where there's a lot of disagreement, has been useful for moving the conversation forward.
No, I think you explained it very clearly. So thank you for that, because I haven't, it was very clear. So your role in this UVM role, explain your role as far as what you're doing. And what I was trying to understand is this position, which sounds like an amazing position and very impactful for your target market, is this something that is replicated all over I'll say the US for now, because I know that, I saw that the NET, I forget acronyms. I'm not good with all the acronyms, but I remembered NET. Like that organization seemed to have people like you and like your role in other parts of the country. So just jump in, just explain that role to me and how it replicates throughout the US. Because I'm like, I'm thinking I'm in New York, on Long Island specifically. Who would be, my Lisa Chase to go to?
Yes. So your Lisa Chase at Cornell Cooperative Extension is Lindsay Pashow, who's based in the Adirondacks, but I would be happy to introduce you to her. I don't know if there's anyone on Long Island or closer to you that's working in agritourism, but Lindsay would know. She's
Okay.
like the main person. And I will say that most people in my role, including myself, agritourism is not my full-time job. There's exceptions like Rachel Callahan at University of California Extension. She is an agritourism specialist. And so, her role is to focus on farms open to visitors. And that's what she does 100% of the time. More
Okay.
often, what we find, at least within Extension, and NET is the National Extension Tourism Network, and it's been an amazing place for me to connect with other colleagues doing this work. What happens is you end up with people who have a lot of different jobs to do, and agritourism is a piece of it. And then what's happened with me is I've become more and more focused on agritourism, unfortunately, to the exclusion of some other things that would be great to work on. But we only have so much time and so many hours in the day, and agritourism has become a real priority for Vermont. So I wasn't hired as an agritourism specialist. My official title is natural resources specialist, and I still get a lot of questions about a lot of other areas to work on. I'm also the director of the Vermont Tourism Research Center at the University of Vermont. So I used to do earlier when I started working at UVM Extension around 22 years ago, I had much more of a mix of outdoor recreation and agritourism and other conflict management and other types of applied research and outreach. But agritourism, my work in agritourism has really grown at the expense of some of these areas that are still very important and often very connected with agritourism. We could definitely use more capacity to support agritourism and related businesses as well.
Your website has tremendous resources for farmers who are looking to get into this category and open up their farms in different ways. So do you work on putting all those resources together? And it's you. Obviously you have a good network. I know there's some other farms and that seem to be very active with you. So
yes. I've got a great team of colleagues within Vermont, but also around the US and increasingly around the globe. So I will say there's really nothing I do by myself. Everything that you look at, the Vermont Agritourism Collaborative website, for example, that is a shared effort between, certainly I'm involved, but I work with partners at Shelburne Farms, the Farm-Based Education Network, the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, the Vermont Department of Tourism and Marketing, the Vermont Fresh Network, Vermont Farm to Plate Network, NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont. There's a whole team of us just within Vermont that are working together to support agritourism. And then as we branch out and get into other states and multi-state or even multinational collaborations, there's always some sort of group effort going on supporting whatever it is that we're putting out, whether it's workshops or conferences or resources.
So when a farmer is looking to expand or get into agritourism in some capacity, what are some of the biggest challenges that they face? What are the things, there's probably a theme, different, certain things that you hear a lot from farmers. What are those things?
Yeah, so I do get a lot of calls from farmers and increasingly from farmers in Vermont, but increasingly also farmers outside of Vermont who have been to our webinars or came across our website. And very often it's even questions about how do I even begin? And I think part of what's complicated with agritourism is there's so many different options. So people need to try to decide how do they want to begin? What are the activities, the experiences that resonate most with their farm, their family, their lifestyle goals, their financial goals. And to that end, we have to help farmers think through the process. We do have a number of resources on the website that I can send to you links afterwards on how to get started. Some of it's like checklists or worksheets that you as a farmer would do, ideally with your business partners or family members or other people who might be involved in this business with you, to kind of help think through what are the types of visitor experiences that you might want to offer. For example, an overnight farm stay like Beth Kennett has, where visitors come and it's only a few at a time, but they stay in her home. They eat meals with her and her family around the table. And that works really well for her and her family. But then there are other farms I talk to that say, I do not want people in my house or at my table. I want them to come at a certain time and leave at a certain time, and have it also only be on certain days. So there's a lot of lifestyle questions as well as financial questions to work through. And if you're just starting out, we have sort of some very basic checklists and worksheets to help you think these things through. And then as you get further along, there's a whole business planning process that can kind of take you through all the different aspects related to liability and insurance and safety and marketing and all the risk management, all the different pieces that a farm needs to think about.
Yeah, you had some really good links on there to work through. I saw step by step, especially on the business planning. People may understand business planning, but there's obviously unique attributes to doing this. So let me put you on the spot quickly. So I know you've worked with a ton of farms. So what's been one of the most unique agritourism, things that a farm is doing? Anything really unique out there?
Boy, I am going to say farmers have always been the most inventive, some of the most inventive people ever. So agritourism is no exception. And even now, when people who are not working in agritourism hear it, they might think, oh, corn mazes, pumpkin patches, and that's still definitely a part of it. But here in Vermont, we have farm to ballet. We have
that is cool.
oh yeah. You'll have to Google it. It's very cool. It's performances that are connected to our food system. So, it is still an educational event on a farm, but it's also bringing in the arts in a way that a lot of other farmers are bringing in the arts in a number of different ways. For example, Art in the Orchard is something that happens in Western Massachusetts. And I've got a colleague in South Carolina that does this whole farm to art tour where different art installations, a lot of these are outdoor art installations that are connected to farming. So those are some of the creative things that farmers are doing. We're seeing so much amazing work also with diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. For example, in Vermont, we've got the Clemens Family Farm, which is has been an African-American owned farm for generations now, and they do a lot of education around the African diaspora and bringing that into our food system and our culture. So farms are so creative and entrepreneurial, and there's no end to the amazing ideas that different farms are coming up with.
That was good. Thank you. That was very interesting. Inspired some ideas with me. So I want to comment on one. I was looking at some of it started out with the Vermont statistics on, I guess it was some analysis done more in 2017 and 2018. So it's a little old. It had some projections for obviously going into this year, but there was one interesting thing I thought. So the market share by type of agritourism. When I think the event, you have it broken out by event and recreation, which includes more of the festivals and corn mazes and stuff. And then you have the experience and education, which is, more of that immersion type of thing based on the definition, and then direct market, which would be farm stands and stuff like that. So 58% is the event and recreation. And sometimes when I think back when I used to bring my kids when they were young to corn mazes and pumpkin picking and all those things, or, apple picking, I, was I really thinking about agriculture as I was doing it? Yes, it's an introduction, but I think the real education comes on the other two categories, which totaled 43%. So it was just an interesting look at, when we talk about what's agritourism and what is kind of on that line of, because I think one of the greatest impacts of agritourism from when I did it at my own farm at the time, and when I was in Belize and Dominican Republic, was the education piece, and just those watching and hearing and listening and being part of it, and then having it impact your life in a way when you come back to whatever your environment is, that you actually make a change, or you start telling someone about your experience and it impacts them. So we need a lot more of that going on. And sometimes I feel when you're on the corn maze with the screaming kids and trying to get the picture, that may not be happening as much. Although, look, it's an introduction, it's a connection that's being made. So it was just interesting to see that 58% is still that, and 43% is the other, which is a good percentage, though. So it was just an interesting observation I made on that. And that was also from, I think, 2017. So it was a little old.
Yeah, it's an interest, and I'm not sure exactly which statistics you're looking at, but it's an interesting point.
It was this.
Oh, okay. Oh, and that was across the globe. Yeah.
Yes, this one is global. Yes.
Right. Okay. So that, right. That was from one of those international market research studies that, can be interesting to look at, but are not to be confused with peer review, rigorous research. But what I will say is the US is somewhat unique in terms of the emphasis on agritainment. And this is something that I would say certain states have picked up on more than Vermont. I think in Vermont, our farmers have really tried to focus on authentic agricultural experiences and education, which still is fun for kids and fun for families, while we see in other parts of the country, especially, more of the super mega slide and activities that don't necessarily connect with agriculture. And it's on a farm, but it's not necessarily connected with agriculture. And it's interesting talking to people from other countries who see that in the US. I was talking to a farmer in Australia, actually, who is worried about that, because one of the challenges for a lot of farms, and this is especially true for farms in Oregon and California, where there's a lot of regulation around what you can do as a farm. So I think in part because of the agritainment that happens on farms, certain communities have pushed back and said, oh no, we don't want agritourism. We don't want this to happen in our community. And we want these to be working farms, productive farms. We don't want them to become sort of agricultural theme parks. So then it makes it harder for farms that want to do agricultural education and literacy on their farm. It makes them harder to diversify at all. And that's happening here in the US. It's also happening in other countries. Like this farmer in Australia was telling me, regulations are hitting farmers in Australia because the policymakers, Google Agritourism, see some of the stuff going on in the US and say, we don't want that here. So I think there is, while we want to support farms and help them stay in business and stay viable as working farms, there is a balance to be had that can be tricky and does vary in different parts of the U.S.
That's that's really important. I because I know on Long Island we do have a lot of the agritainment, and it's gotten out of hand. More out east for me. I'm close to Stony Brook University, so I'm in the center of the island, but east of me is where most of the farmland is. And especially in the fall, during pumpkin season, early on during apple and then pumpkin season, you don't even want to go near out east. The traffic, and they have the slides and all the entertainment. And that's why I'm saying that I remember there was no real education. And when I was trying to work with some people and take them out there to, actually go onto a farm and learn and get that more intimate connection. And a lot of the farmers didn't have time for that because they were planning for these, thousands of people coming in. So it was disappointing in that way because I really, those immersive experiences, those tours that you're really learning is where I think the true impact of agritourism is, especially to our world and our earth and all the bigger things as well. So that was really good. I like how we differentiated that. So tell me, the national network that you're a part of, tell me what the role of that is, because I did see how there was a plan from 2020 to 2000. There was some program you were working on that ends in 2025. There was a whole write-up on a mission. I know. I actually did.
A strategic plan, right?
Yes.
The strategic plan.
Yes, and it had an end date of 2025. Okay. So I was just curious if that was a grant end date or what that was about. So if you could talk about that, and then let's roll into the global network, which I know was more recently officially launched. I know it was kind of an unofficial thing, and then now you are leading that up. And I know there is something coming up in a few weeks, actually. So let's talk about, feel free to transition from national to global.
Okay. So I have benefited ever since I started working at University of Vermont Extension over 20 years ago. I've really benefited by being a part of this National Extension Tourism Network, meeting colleagues, not only working in agritourism, working in, community development and placemaking and downtowns and outdoor recreation and sustainable tourism. And every 2 years, there's a conference that the National Extension Tourism Network hosts. And actually, the next one is October of 2025 in New Hampshire. So something to keep in mind if you're wanting to learn more about it and also share what you're doing too. There'll be, there's always a call for proposals where you can, submit a proposal to give a presentation or run a roundtable or something like that. And when I started going to these National Extension Tourism Network meetings, there was not a whole lot on agritourism, but it's something that's really increased, as has agritourism, during the past 20 years. And while it's mostly run by folks that work for the cooperative extension system, like myself or Sea Grant, it's certainly open to everyone, but it's not. I would say it tends to be a little more on the applied research outreach type. Some farmers will come to the conferences, but not quite as much. Although then, we're all in our respective states and communities working closely with farmers and with local entrepreneurs and businesses. And actually, a couple of years ago, we began an agritourism working group as part of the National Extension Tourism Network. So that's been a really nice way to formalize the increasing importance of agritourism to the national extension work that's taking place around the country. And what we've been talking about at that 2025 conference in New Hampshire in October we have been talking about whether, we want to have like a pre-conference or a post-conference thing, maybe a farm tour or something like that, that's specifically around agritourism. So stay tuned. There'll be more on that soon. But like you were talking about going to Belize for this chocolate tour and how it was somewhat transformational for you, if I could use that word.
Definitely.
A transformational experience for me was back in 2018. The first World Congress on Agritourism was held in Bolzano, Italy. And I had been to Italy a few years before, visiting an agriturismo in Tuscany. So I had a sense of, oh, this is what it looks like in Italy. It's, some pieces are like the US and other pieces are very different. The US has so much variation in what we call agritourism, while in Italy, agriturismo is much more focused on this overnight farm stay, immersive educational experience. However, when I saw the call for proposals to present at the first World Congress on Agritourism, I, of course, wanted to go to learn more about what was happening in Italy and also to share our work in Vermont. So I was very fortunate that the director of Extension was a person with big vision. And so when I said, hey, can you help me try to get some funding to go and share the work we're doing in Vermont? What he said to me was, yes, I will help you get there to share about Vermont, but also I want you to bring the next international conference to Vermont. So I packed my bag. This was in 2018. And then, months later, packed my bag, heading to Bolzano, Italy. And when I got there, it was really interesting looking around the room and realizing there were 6 of us from the US and maybe another
Wow.
5 or 6 from Canada. And that was it. Canada and the US were not well represented. And, these were some of sort of.
Why do you think we weren't?
It's a
Just
good question.
awareness? Just awareness?
I think that was part of it. There were 250 people from 42 different countries, and just a very small percent from the US and Canada. It's a good question. I don't know if people didn't know about it or didn't feel like it was important to attend, or maybe agritourism wasn't enough of a priority in the work they did. Maybe they didn't understand the sort of the benefits of learning about it internationally. It's a good question that I don't have a great answers to, but I think the US will be much better represented at the second World Congress on Agritourism, which is happening May 16th to 18th, just a couple weeks from now. Again, in Bolzano, Italy, organized by the same people. And I personally know a lot of people from the US going, so I know we're going to have more than 5 people there. I think the US will be much better represented. But what happened in the interim is, went over there, and as part of and because there were so many different countries represented, that was something that was transformational for me, was to realize, oh, there are people from India and Rwanda and the Philippines and, plenty in Europe, but also all over the rest of the world. And agritourism is happening in different ways with different definitions. And, this is much bigger than Italy as kind of, one of the founding countries of agriturismo, and then the US, learning a bit from them. I was learning so much from people from all over the world. And when I mentioned to the Italians who had organized that conference, so where's the next one going to be? What do you think of having it in Vermont? Their response was, the World Agritourism Congress can only happen here in Bolzano, Italy, run by UREC Research, that firm. Like, sort of, we own that in a sense. But after a lot of negotiation, after I pointed out, well, there's only a handful of people here from the US and Canada, maybe if there are other international events in other places, that can help grow interest and support for agritourism. So for the next World Congress in Italy, you'll have a lot more people from the US and Canada. Eventually, they relented, and the International Workshop on Agritourism, notice the name is different, was planned to happen in October of 2020. So it was basically going to be 2 years. The thinking was World Agritourism Congress in Bolzano, Italy. The workshop happened somewhere else,
Right.
2 years later. Then we go back to Italy for another Congress. And then 2 years later, a workshop happened somewhere else. Well, we all know what happened in 2020. The pandemic, everything shut down, travel shut down, the conference was postponed. But we didn't want to just drop everything. So we went online with a series of webinars. And that actually was very effective for expanding the network and reaching a whole lot of people that were not already part of this International Agritourism Network through the World Agritourism Congress. So we pretty much kept running webinars on all different topics with all different audiences in mind, not just farmers, not just researchers, not just extension, not just tourism people, not just policymakers. Like, we were mixing it up and trying to bring in everyone, which I think is where, a lot of the real breakthroughs and a lot of the real magic happens, when you've got all these people with different perspectives coming together, whether it's on a webinar or even better, in person. So we finally held the International Workshop on Agritourism in Burlington, Vermont in August of 2022. And at that conference, on the last day, we had an open plenary session where we wanted to give people the opportunity to share what they had learned and also think collectively about how do we move things forward. And different people from all over the world took turns coming up to the mic to share. And it was really a beautiful experience, very touching and heartwarming. But one theme kept coming up, and that was, we need a more structured a way of getting together internationally. So whether it's an association or a network or whatever, we need something that's more structured. And so from that, a small group of people from around the world began meeting, and on April 11th of 2023, the Global Agritourism Network was launched with a Zoom meeting.
Yes, I watched it. Yes.
Oh, did you? Okay, you
Yes.
saw the recording online.
Yes, I saw the recording. Yep.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I almost never go back and watch recordings, so I never know quite how they come across.
No, it was excellent. And what I definitely noticed from it is there was, you talked about different types of groups were present when you did that poll. There were good percentages of various types of groups, from research to farmers to people in the tourism industry. It was very diverse. So it definitely, held up to what you said as far as, bringing this diverse group together and different needs. But yeah, so now you have this network, and you are at the helm right now.
Yeah, so I had the honor of being elected founding chair.
So your director must be very happy with you influenced them to come to Vermont. Yes, COVID got in the way, but you overcame that. And now you're leading the organization. That's pretty good.
Yes, and one of the things that I try to be very careful about is, I know, like, my home base is University of Vermont Extension. So I always want to make sure whatever I'm doing that's not in Vermont, I'm bringing, lessons learned and resources and connections back to Vermont, as well as, sharing what we're doing in Vermont, because I do recognize that, my primary appointment is with University of Vermont Extension, but I will say, especially working in the field of agritourism, being involved with a national and international network has been tremendously beneficial across the US and across the world in so many ways. And I will say one of a point of pride for that international agritourism conference that we held in Vermont was that the number one category of attendee was farmer. So we also had a lot of researchers and service providers and people in tourism, but we want to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where we're disconnected from the true practitioners, from the farmers that
Right.
are the ones that are making
Right.
it happen on the ground.
So while you're in this leadership role, what do you for you to be successful, however how are you defining success in this role over, I guess it's a 2-year tenure. I mean, not that you're not going to be part of it going forward, but as the leader that you are, what do you want to see
It's a great question, and where I don't have experience starting a network like this before. I've been a part of a number of different networks, but I haven't started an association or a nonprofit or anything like that. So we're now grappling with questions of legal incorporation and bylaws and things that I've been part of association, I've experienced as like a member or maybe even on the board of directors of an association, but not that I've helped develop from the ground up. So again, like I mentioned before, everything we do that's successful, there's always a team behind it and always other people involved. That is very true about this too, where I think a lot of the work is taking place through this committee structure, where we have a specific committee that's working on the legal incorporation and the bylaws and the guidelines and those sort of structural pieces. And then we have other people that are specifically focused on research. I'm personally involved in the education committee, where I'm continuing to develop webinars, again, for all different audiences. And then we have actually one of the most exciting committees is a definitions and standards committee, where this is Dr. Carla Barbieri from North Carolina State University. Have you run into her yet?
No, but I saw her on the video.
Yes, if you want to interview her, I can definitely help you
Yep.
make an
Would love
introduction.
to.
But
Would love to.
so Dr. Carla Barbieri has been leading this definitions and standards committee. And initially, the idea was, let's come up with a universal global definition. Well, it didn't take too long before they said, okay, we're going to come up with core values related to agritourism. And I can actually email to you. This is an ongoing process, but I can send to you in an email if you're interested, kind of the status of where things stand with the core values. And it's very consistent with the conceptual framework that people in the US came up with as well.
Excellent.
It's that core of it's got to be a real working farm, and ideally you've got authentic educational experiences on the farm.
Excellent. Just to go back, the UREC research, so they initially started or saw the need for something. What are they, a private organization or are they academic? Like what? I wasn't clear on who they are. And obviously I know they still have a significant role as well in the organization, but I just wanted to clear up who they were. And, they started this in Italy, I guess.
Yeah, so UREC Research is a private research firm based in Bolzano. And Dr. Tomas Streifeneder has been doing research on agritourism, and part of what made me want to go to this First World Agritourism Congress is I had read some of his publications, and his publications do dig into that, what is agritourism, and he's a big proponent of the authenticity and education that goes with agritourism and distinguishing it from, I guess they refer to it as countryside tourism. Maybe that's what they call it in Italy. Maybe we would call it rural tourism, but basically, really making clear that this needs to be connected to farming. And so I think one of the original goals for that First World Congress on agritourism was to bring people from the EU together to come up with a European Union definition and guidelines. However, we were very fortunate that they opened it up to a World Agritourism Congress, and from there, it's really taken off in the way that agritourism is taking off around the globe.
Excellent. So then the one that's coming up soon, I guess May 16th, that's in Italy, but you can also participate online, correct?
Yes, that's exactly right. It is a hybrid, just like the conference that we had in Vermont. We feel that while there's no substitute for getting together in person,
Agreed.
We realize that's just not feasible for everyone who wants to participate for a variety of reasons, and feel very strongly that it's important to have some sort of hybrid or online component to allow people to tune in.
So how are you? I presume you're going.
Yes, I am going. And actually, the day before, on the 15th of May, we have a retreat for the leadership of the Global Agritourism Network. Because, since it officially launched in April of 2023, so a little over a year ago, we have not all been together in the same place. And still not everyone's going to make it. Even that leadership retreat will have some people zooming in, especially from, places in Asia where it's a little more challenging to travel to Italy.
Excellent. And are you presenting at this event?
Yes, I am really excited to be able to not only share what we've been doing with the Global Agritourism Network, but also be able to share a lot of the research and the outreach and the resources that we've developed here in Vermont and also around the U.S.
So this is amazing information, and you've taught me a lot, especially about the definition and some of the, the differentiation in that definition. So thank you so much. I'm excited for what's to come with this global network. And, in reading a lot of the stories and listening to the videos, a lot of the farmers from Vermont, I was so inspired by a lot of their stories. So you've done a tremendous job in exposing what is going on in Vermont. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I will say once again that everything I do is a collaborative effort. And I feel especially fortunate that when I first got to University of Vermont Extension, I had farmers like Beth Kennett of Liberty Hill Farm and, many other farms who are still around and I'm still working very closely with, as well as a number of, newer farms. Maybe they weren't here 20, 22 years ago, but they really take on leadership roles and direct me and, sort of give me my motivation, give me my direction in terms of how I can best support farmers here in Vermont, as well as regionally, nationally, and internationally. It's all been a group effort, and I certainly can't take credit for anything on my own.
But it also takes a strong leader to pull it all together as well and give people credit. So congratulations on everything that you've accomplished. It's pretty amazing, and I'm inspired by it. So thank you. And thank you for taking the time to meet with me today. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. As you can tell, I could go on for another 6 hours, and especially you got me going down that definitions and standards rabbit hole. Oh my God,
Yes.
So I don't want to just gratuitously fill your inbox, but if you are, looking for more publications or references or whatever, happy to send them your way.
I definitely welcome all of that. Thank you so much. I hope our AgriTourist podcast prompts you to think more about where your food comes from, whether it be your vegetables, fruits, meats, and even those sweet treats. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with someone you think may truly benefit from or be inspired by it. Visit us at agra-tourist.com. Until next time. As we are learning from many of our farmers and entrepreneurs, strong connections help propel our visions. Through my interview with Lisa Chase from the University of Vermont Extension and Vermont Tourism Research Center, I was connected to an exciting and new organization called the Global Agritourism Network, or GAN for short. The Global Network is made up of agritourism stakeholders from around the world. They include farmers and ranchers, researchers, educators, community planners, policymakers, agricultural service providers, and tour operators, among others. It is currently free to join, so if you have any interest in agritourism, check them out at agritourism.edu/GAN, or just Google Global Agritourism Network. The link will be in our show notes as well. You never know, this global network may help you take your agritourism vision to the next level.